When we think about getting good with money, our minds usually go straight to the technical stuff, right? Like spreadsheets, complex formulas, maybe an MBA. But Morgan Housel's brilliant book, The Psychology of Money, argues that's mostly wrong. He says doing well with money has very little to do with how smart you are and a whole lot more to do with how you behave. It's not physics, it's psychology.
To really get what this means, let me tell you about two guys. On one hand, you've got Ronald Reed. He was a janitor, a gas station attendant, lived a super simple, quiet life. In the other corner, you have Richard Fuscone. He was the total opposite. Harvard MBA, big shot executive at Merrill Lynch, living it up in a massive 18,000 square foot mansion.
Okay, so based on their resumes, this seems like a no-brainer, right? One of these men ended up leaving millions of dollars to charity, and the other one went completely bankrupt. So take a second. Who do you think was who?
Are you ready for this? It was the janitor, Ronald Reed. Over decades of patient saving and investing, he secretly built up an $8 million fortune. The high-flying executive with the fancy degrees, he lost everything. This story right here just perfectly kicks off the central point of the whole book. So, what on earth happened? How is that even possible? Well, it had nothing to do with intelligence or education. It came down to something much, much simpler. Ronald Reed was patient. Richard Fuscone was greedy. And in the end, that simple difference in their behavior was everything. It completely erased the massive gap in their backgrounds.
And that's really the key takeaway from their story. Financial success is a soft skill. It's not like a hard science with all these rigid, complicated rules. It's more about managing your own psychology, your own emotions, biases, and behaviors.
Okay, so let's build on that with a next core concept. And this one is really powerful. The idea is this: no one is crazy. We sometimes see people make financial decisions and think, what are they thinking? But the thing is, their choices make perfect sense to them because they're based entirely on their own unique view of the world.
The book just nails this with a quote. It says something like, "Your personal experience with money is this tiny, almost 0% of what's happened in financial history, but it makes up maybe 80% of how you think the world works. We're all just living in our own little bubble, anchored to what we've personally seen and felt."
Let me show you exactly what I mean. If you were born in, say, 1950, you grew up watching the stock market do, well, pretty much nothing. For years, it just went sideways. So what lesson do you learn from that? Probably that stocks are a disappointing, stagnant game.
But what if you were born just 20 years later, in 1970? Whoa, you saw a completely different reality. You witnessed a spectacular bull market that just exploded, growing nearly 10 times over. The lesson you'd learn? Stocks are an incredible wealth-generating machine.
And there you have it. You've got two totally rational people with completely opposite beliefs about how the stock market works. And the only difference between them was the dumb luck of when they happened to be born. See, neither one of them is crazy. They're just products of their own unique history.
That idea of dumb luck leads us right into the next big idea, these powerful, invisible forces that are always at play. The identical twins of luck and risk. We love to talk about our successes as a result of our hard work and smart decisions, but we almost always ignore the massive role that pure chance plays.
I mean, take Bill Gates. Obviously, the man is a genius, but he was also the beneficiary of an unbelievable stroke of luck. In 1968, he happened to go to Lakeside, one of the only high schools on the entire planet that had a computer. And that's where he met Paul Allen and where they got to just play around and code for hours on end.
What were the odds of that? For a teenager in 1968 to have that kind of access to a computer? It was literally a 1 in a million shot. Even Gates himself admits that without that incredible lucky break, Microsoft probably wouldn't exist. That's the power of luck.
But luck, remember, has an identical twin: risk. And for every amazing story of incredible good fortune, there's an opposite story of tragic bad luck. Back at that same high school, Lakeside, Bill Gates had another brilliant friend named Kent Evans, who he was sure he'd start a company with one day.
Ken Evans was just as smart, just as driven, but he never got the chance to build that future. He was killed in a mountaineering accident before he could even graduate high school. Another 1 in a million event. But this time it was risk, working in the exact opposite direction of Gates's luck.
And that's the key, right? Luck and risk are really just two sides of the same coin. They're a humbling reminder that the world is way too complex for 100% of your effort to determine 100% of your outcome. You simply can't respect one without having an equal amount of respect for the other.
So if our financial lives are guided by our own behavior and these giant forces of chance, what's one of the most destructive behaviors out there? It's the danger of always wanting more. It's that social comparison game where the goalpost for what feels like enough is always moving.
I mean, think about the cautionary tales of people who already had everything. People like Rajat Gupta or Bernie Madoff. These guys had fortunes worth tens, even hundreds of millions. They had everything they could possibly need, but it still wasn't enough. They wanted more, and they were willing to risk everything they had and needed for something they didn't have or needed.
This brings us to one of the most profound stories in the whole book. You've got two authors, Kurt Vonnegut and Joseph Heller, at this swanky party thrown by a billionaire. Vonnegut leans over and says their host probably made more money that day than Heller's famous novel Catch-22 has made in its entire history. And Heller's reply is just perfect. He says, yes, but I have something he will never have. Enough. Wow, that is real wealth.
And that little word, enough, is the perfect transition to our final big lesson. See, getting rich and staying rich are not the same thing. They're not even close. In fact, they are two completely different skills that often require opposite mindsets.
When you think about staying rich, who's the first person that comes to mind? For most of us, it's Warren Buffett. And while his skill as an investor is absolutely legendary, that's not actually his real secret.
The true engine behind his almost incomprehensible wealth is simply time. He wasn't just a good investor. He was a good investor for a very, very, very long time. The math on this is just staggering. His net worth is over $84 billion. But get this, if he had started investing at a more normal age, say 30, and retired at 60, his net worth would be about $12 million. That means 99.9% of his wealth came because of his longevity. His real superpower wasn't just being a great investor, it was surviving long enough for compounding to work its incredible magic. And that really leaves us all with one crucial question. Getting rich often requires taking big risks and a healthy dose of optimism. But staying rich, that requires the opposite. It takes humility and a little bit of paranoia. The fear that you could lose it all just as fast. It's about being unbreakable so you can stick around long enough for the odds to eventually fall in your favor. So, which plan are you building?
Subscribe now for more book summaries.